is and ever shall be. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, November 19th, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and we get together here every Sunday night, to just meet another everyday Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. I find that if we go to coffee hour and you sit down next to someone and you start talking to them, you'll be amazed at the stories that they have. I think Orthodox people are really fascinating. And it's probably in part because we come from so many different places. There are a lot of immigrant families with a lot of fascinating stories. And then also, of course, converts come in from all different parts of the world, different ideologies and theologies and all sorts of stuff, and they find their way into Orthodoxy always in unique and interesting ways. So I think it's really beautiful, actually, to sit down and get to know one another, especially because we're divided here in North America into many jurisdictions, and plus we live in different regions. Sometimes we worship in different languages. Sometimes, there can be an Orthodox person down the street and you don't even know it because they go to a different kind of parish, right? So I think it's wonderful for all of us to get an opportunity to get to know one another and build up some Orthodox unity. So we are going to be enjoying another Everyday Orthodox Christian tonight, and I'm looking forward to introducing you. I do want to remind you, of course, that you're welcome to call in. The number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And as always, Matushka Trudy Richter is right here producing the show. She is taking your calls, so you can call in and talk to Matushka, and then she'll put you on and you can ask anything you like to our guest. So let me tell you about our guest, actually. I'm very excited about this because Pano is a friend of mine. We have tonight Dr. Pano Kanelos, and he's actually the founding president of the University of Austin, which is a brand new university here in Austin, Texas. And so in order to found the university, he had to move here. And so now I get to go to church with him and get to know him. And he's really pretty fascinating, actually. He previously was the president at St. John's College in Annapolis. And so while he was there, they launched this huge tuition reduction program. And I'm sure Pano will tell us all about it. But I think that's really neat. That's really a very necessary thing right now as costs are soaring at American colleges. And then, he's done many things. Among the most important would be marrying his wonderful wife, Christina. They have 2 fantastic kids. And I get to go to camp with them, and they're fantastic. I love them. He actually also is an expert on Shakespeare. He's authored and edited many books and articles. He's just, all kinds of fascinating stuff. So I look forward to hearing from him. Also, I want to let you know that Pano got his bachelor's at Northwestern, a master's degree at Boston University, and then went on for his PhD at the University of Chicago. So unfortunately, he couldn't get into any good schools, I guess. So he just went to all of these fantastic schools. But all right, so without any further ado, here he is, Dr. Pano Kanelos. Pano, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me. What a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I'm so glad that you were able to come on. And you're a busy man, so I'm glad that we were able to interrupt your vacation, at your family vacation for Thanksgiving to get you on the show. So thank you so much, Pano. We do appreciate it. But so tell me, actually, I know you're in Chicago right now visiting family. Does that mean that's where your stories, were you born and raised in Chicago?
So I was born in Chicago, although partially raised in Chicago. So my parents met in Chicago. I come from a Greek American family on both sides. My father was an immigrant who came here in 1960 in his 20s, and met my mother, who was born in Chicago, but of a Greek American family. So when I was born, we lived here. We lived in the city originally and then out in the suburbs. But when I was about 7, 8 years old, we moved out to Arizona. So the rest of my growing up was out there.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So as a kid, did you initially like it when you got to Arizona, or were you like, take me back to the big city?
That's a great question. Arizona was sort of what I remember from that move was just showing up at a place that was intensely bright. It seemed like the sun was everywhere and there was no shade anywhere, and everything was sort of brown and somewhat intimidating. There's lots of plants you can bump into that will spike you and all that. So it was a strange move as a kid, but I came to love it. We had a great community there, and I was there through high school, and still my family stayed on there. So my parents stayed on there, and my sister. So we're back there very frequently.
Oh, that's excellent. That's so nice. Yeah, I can imagine, especially, the Chicago area is the weather's so different, the landscape, so everything's different. It's like changing planets as a little kid showing up there. But I'm glad that it worked out well. What kinds of activities did you enjoy as a kid? Like, what were you like? Were you reading Shakespeare in middle school, or were you like running around being goofy?
No, I was not reading Shakespeare in middle school. I actually didn't discover Shakespeare really in any profound way until I went to college. But I was typical kid, in the sports to some extent. I wasn't super great at sports, but I enjoyed them. My family had a restaurant, so I spent lots and lots of time in the restaurant, in the kitchen, learning how to cook, which is still a love of mine.
Wow.
Our life as a family really did center around church. So I would say the sort of most the deepest personal connections I had at that time in my life were through the church community. We had a
Oh,
really
that's
wonderful parish in Arizona, in Phoenix, Holy Trinity, which was just booming at the time because so many people were moving in that area. So there was, just robust youth groups and Sunday schools and everything. So it was a really, really just rich environment to grow up in.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love hearing that. So did your parents have a Greek restaurant?
No, they did not. They had a series of, sort of typical diners and lunch places and that, but they never owned a Greek restaurant. My extended family in Chicago did. They had restaurants in Greektown. In
Okay.
fact, I was a waiter in Greektown when I was back here in graduate school. I put myself through graduate school by waiting tables at a place called Pegasus down on Halsted Street.
Oh, actually, I've been there, but of course, after you had finished, I don't think we crossed paths. But oh wow, that's so cool. That's really neat.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is true. Like I feel like when I go to a diner, like a really classic American diner, that 9 out of 10 times, if you look closely at the menu, you start to see it, right? Like there's, oh, here's some feta. Oh, that's interesting. And they have baklava, really, because it's almost always Greek
That's
families. Like they're not Greek restaurants, but they are Greek restaurants. People don't know it. Right?
Look, I always say that when you were Greek and you came to this country, they handed you the keys to the restaurant when you got off the boat. It was sort of it was all our family, most of our family, extended family, in the restaurant business. But that is this, yeah, that's the kind of secret code. You'll see these diner menus, and they're as soon as you start seeing them inserting feta cheese in strange places, you're at a Greek-owned diner.
Absolutely. And it's literally like most diners. It's
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're on the East Coast, but definitely most diners you'll find it. You find it somewhere. But oh, that's so cool. That's really neat. All right. So you're growing up in this family. You are down in Phoenix where it's very hot. What were you planning to do? Like when you went off to college, how did you decide where to go? And what was it that you wanted to study? Like, how did you picture your life going? Because I know a lot of kids graduate high school and
Yeah.
they're like, I'm going to be an architect. And then they end up, being a teacher or founding a university or something. What were you thinking?
Well, I need to tell you a kind of pre-college story because it'll tell you a lot about the family that I grew up in, my parents, especially my father, that will give you a sense of how my life was shaped. So I grew up in a family that was very pious, very church going. And when I was 16 years old, I got my dad bought me a car, kind of an old beater, but it was, I was really excited about it. And we're sort of driving on one of the first trips together in the car. And, because my father was so church centric and pious and that, I guess I was kind of teasing him, but I was the answer. So it's like, Dad, now that I'm becoming a man, I just want to share something with you. He's like, what is it? I said, well, I'm thinking of becoming a priest. And, I thought he'd be very excited. And he looked at me like with just totally incredulous. And he's like, you? And I said, yeah. He goes, you can't be a priest. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he looks at me total, like straight on, goes, with the life that you've led? And I'm like, I'm a 16-year-old kid. I don't know what I've done wrong at this point other than like refuse to mow the lawn a couple times. And so I was like, Dad, I go, what have I done? What sins do I have? What have I done? I said, like, look at all these saints of the church who led these sinful lives, and they went on and they became saints. And my dad said, he goes, oh, Pano, he goes, you can be a saint, but you can't be a priest. And so that's the family that I grew up in, just, FYI.
I love that.
So, and my dad's still going. He just turned 87 this week, and he hasn't lost any of his vim and vigor. So we still hear it from him. He's great. But yeah, so when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I mean, I was, nobody in my family had ever been to college on, my mom's side, my dad's side, and that. And so I sort of stumbled into college really not knowing what to expect. In fact, my first week at college, I was sitting in my dorm room with my new roommate, Steve, who was from Atlanta. And he's like, what do you want to major in? And I had no idea what that meant. Like, I didn't know what a major was. I was, I was first generation college kid. There was no like college 101 for dummies guidebook for me. Maybe there was, I didn't have it, no internet. And so I sort of thought about it. I'm like, oh, wait a second, maybe you have to specialize in things when you get to college. But, I was that clueless. So my vision for what I wanted to be was really, really, not particularly clear. I just thought getting to college was the thing that you had to do.
Right. Just getting there was the goal.
Yeah,
totally
pretty much.
I get that. Absolutely. And so you were back up in Chicago. So that's kind of neat. You were, near family and getting to run around. But did you have like a whole bunch of cousins you could run around with when you were in college?
I did. That was one of the reasons I came back. So I went to Northwestern University, just north of Chicago in Evanston. And, again, not having a family that had university experience, I didn't know how to pick a college, but I knew that I wanted to leave Arizona because Arizona's primarily just big state schools. And I was hoping to have a smaller school experience in that. So, I mean, the only place I was really familiar with was sort of Northwestern and a few of the other schools in Chicago because we visited here so frequently. So I came to Chicago and yes, had the big extended family around. And, that was a great comfort to me, as I was sort of far away from home and have a very, very close extended family, lots and lots of cousins and aunts and uncles and that. So, it was great. And I stayed, I've sort of been in and out of Chicago most of my life, lived all over the place, but I'd say probably over half my life has been in Chicago at different stages.
Oh, wow. That's neat. And then, so that really is a hometown, even though so much of your youth was really in Arizona. That's kind of double hometowns. You've got two. That's nice. Yeah. But so was it hard on your family, like moving so far away from all the extended family? Or did your parents kind of like need their independence, or did they miss everybody and travel back all the time, or how was it?
Well, I think all of the above. I think they needed independence. It was difficult. We traveled back. I mean, the whole thing. You have to remember my father had come here by himself from Greece as a, young man. And so he was already had that experience of, being at a great distance from his roots and his family. And, the plan, it's funny. I'll tell you a story about how we ended up in Arizona, which, again, is indicative of the kind of family I grew up in. We weren't planning on it. So my father and my uncle Jimmy, who was really his cousin, but they were raised like brothers, were in Chicago and decided that they were tired of the winters and they wanted a place that was reminded them a little bit more of Greece. So the plan was to go to California and get a restaurant, buy a restaurant out there, and then move the family. So they drove, the two of them, across country, went all the way out to California, went around Southern California, LA, San Diego, Orange County, but nothing was quite right. And on the way back, they stopped in Phoenix. They got off the highway, and lo and behold, there was a little diner, and they walked in, and of course it was owned by a Greek guy. So they introduced themselves. They sat in a booth at the back and were drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. And the guy asked them, "Well, what are you guys doing?" And he said, my dad said, "Well, we're looking for a restaurant. We're all over California and looking for a restaurant." And the guy was older, and he kind of looks around at his own restaurant. He goes, He goes, "I'm ready to retire. Why don't you buy this one?" And my dad takes a look around and goes, "How much do you want?" And the guy goes, $20,000. This was 1977. My dad goes, "Okay." So he opens up his jacket. He pulls a wad of cash out, counts out $20,000 in $100 bills, and says, "Do you have a phone? I need to call my wife." So that's how we ended up in Arizona.
That's awesome. I love that your dad was driving around with tens of thousands of dollars in cash. What could have gone wrong, really, right? But that's one of those. That's one of those classic kind of immigrant stories too, where they don't really trust banks. It's just like, "Oh, we'll do everything in cash, no problem.
Nope.
Don't worry about it. We don't need any records. Don't need a contract. Here we go."
It was the 70s. It was a different era. Driving across country, and he had this massive green Cadillac Eldorado. No seatbelts, wads of cash. It was like, it was like a Quentin Tarantino film or something.
Yes. Him and Jimmy smoking.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is a fantastic story. I love that. So, wow. Okay. So how did your mom feel about that? Because she had kind of signed on for Southern California, which is a different thing than Arizona. Did she just roll with it easily, or did she tease him about it or anything?
Yeah. As far as, again, I was a kid, 7, 8 years old. So, I was clueless. I'm still pretty clueless. So I don't know, but, I don't know what I would have tapped into then emotionally. My mom passed a few years ago, but she was a saint. She was just a wonderful woman, and just a great wife, and never made much of a ruckus about things as far as I knew. So I think she did roll with it. I'm sure they had some words behind the scenes, but nothing that came to the surface.
Well, that's good. Thank God. And memory eternal. Tell me about your mom a little bit. So were both of them very pious, both of your parents? Or was one person kind of pulled the other one along, or what would you say?
Well, that's a great question. So I think my mom pulled the family along for sure, especially when they were young. My dad, being in the restaurant business, especially when they're in Chicago, worked practically 7 days a week. So he was never a churchgoer when I was young. And, Mom would take us to church and, every Sunday while he was working. And, but he had so she was definitely the kind of root stock of the family in terms of the connection of the church. My father had a very interesting, I guess, I don't know if it's a conversion experience, because he was always, Orthodox, and I think relatively warm to the faith, but not practicing as much. But he had an interesting, let's call it an intensification experience. And again, this was probably when I was, I'm going to guess I was 10, 11 years old. We were in Arizona at the time. And he told me the story. I remember as a kid, suddenly my dad stopped working on Sundays and was in church every Sunday and became just extremely committed to living out the Orthodox faith. And, and so I'd asked him, why and how, and he explained that. So my mom had always left a Bible on the coffee table in the living room, sort of left it open. We had this old kind of leather bound King James Bible, very kind of fancy Bible, and I guess my dad one day came from work and he just kind of looked at it. I don't know if something had been going on in his life, and he just started reading it. And he decided he was going to read it from cover to cover, from beginning to end. And it had Old Testament and New Testament. And so he did that. And it took him a long, long time to get through the whole Bible. I mean, over a year, I think, because it was, he was a native Greek speaker, and his English was, is sort of marginal, to be honest. And it was sort of the King James Bible.
Greek Bible.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what I told him. I'm like, he's like, oh, no, it took me so long. It was so hard. It took me over a year to read. I'm like, Dad, why didn't you just get a Bible in Greek? He's like, I never thought about that, And so, so anyway, it was like, this was the Bible he was meant to read. I don't know. That's the one he was meant to read. And so, and that really was let's say, a spiritual intensification experience for him. I mean, he was changed after that. And, to this day is just a rock of faith. I mean, he's such a faithful man. He, one day, I'll tell you another story, going back to smoking and Quentin Tarantino. It really bothered me when I was a kid that he would smoke. I mean, because, everybody's smoking in those days and that, but, I was learning in school that this was a bad thing and that. And
that's our generation.
Yeah.
Our parents were all smoking and we're all freaking out. And like, there's nothing.
They're like ambient smoke everywhere, and my dad and I, again, are in the car one day driving, and I think I'd probably had some lesson in school telling about the evils of smoking, and I was upset because I was worried about him. And I just Dad, I said, how can you smoke? It's so terrible for you. It's so dangerous. And he's like, oh, come on, leave me alone. I got so many things on my mind. I'm like, you're a hypocrite. He looked at me, and I'm like, believe me, I'm not. You don't call Theo Kanelos a hypocrite. I mean, he's an old school Greek dad. He looked at me, and I'm like, oh gosh, this is it. I'm going to get it right here. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, so I just held my ground. I go, you're a hypocrite. I said, you believe that our bodies are the temple of God. Yet, what gives you the right to pollute the temple of God? Smart aleck, 11-year-old that I was. I say this to him, and he looks at me and he goes, "You're right." He stopped smoking on that day. Never picked up another cigarette. I mean, that is the sort of just sort of profundity of his faith. That when something is clear and he understands it, that's what's paramount.
That's beautiful. That's really neat. Wow, that's really neat. It's so funny because when you talk about you and your dad, I can picture you and your son. Like, because, I got to go to camp with Theo, right? So I'm like, as you tell these stories, I can just see you guys having all these same conversations and the same things going on. I think that's neat, though, because, I've known you for a couple of years now, and I've observed that you are a very faithful person as well. So it's really beautiful to see how successfully your parents were able to pass that on to you. Yeah. Did you go through a period where you kind of wandered off from the church, or were you really always, is there a magic? Is it possible that we can raise our kids so that they will love the church and just keep loving it and not run into trouble? Or do we all have to run into trouble? That's my question for you.
Whew, that's a big question. I mean, look, I'm just like everybody else, and there's no straight path. You're on a path and you swerve off the road, you get back on the road, you hit speed bumps, take the analogy any way you want. I will say that, I was so rooted in the church, and it was, so much a part of my sort of DNA that I never thought about leaving the church. I stayed a churchgoer, through college and beyond college and into my marriage and that. So I've never felt disconnected from the church as a centerpiece of my life. But like everybody else, there's some days when you're sort of standing there in church and you're, maybe feeling, that, not as grounded as you might another time, But I will say I'm very thankful, both of my kids, knock on wood, I'm going to say some prayers about this after the conversation, are very connected to the church, even in their teenage years. In fact, my son is just like his grandfather, just like his papu. I mean, he's an Orthodox, like, spiritual warrior. I mean, he talks about the church all the time. In fact, he's trying to convert some of his friends at his Christian school. which is hilarious.
Which is tough because they're like all really intense Christians already, right?
Oh yeah, he goes to this they're mostly evangelical. It's a classical Christian school, and they're great people, great school. But he and his buddy Jonathan are having these like theological discussions, and he's like, "Dad, Jonathan's going to be Orthodox. I'm so excited about this," and it's really fun. So I'm sort of like bookended between my father and my son, between these two like extremely focused, pious Orthodox men, and I'm just sort of like wavering in the middle between the two of they're rocks. I'm a pebble and they're the rocks.
I love that. But it is true. I mean, I've hung out with Theo and I've talked to him about the faith, and he really is. He's really solid and he's really thoughtful. He's a neat kid. Absolutely. And so is Emmy, actually. She's really neat. You have a great family. So how'd you meet Christina? How did you stumble across this fantastic woman that you married?
So yeah, this is it's going to sound cheesy, but we were both at Northwestern University, and we met at an ice cream social held by the Orthodox Christian Fellowship,
that's
OCF.
As cute can be.
So we met, it was an ice cream social, and we met, and afterwards I asked her where she was going. She said, "Oh, I'm going to the library to study," because of course she was. She's a good person. And I said, "Well, that's where I'm going. I'll walk you," which of course I wasn't going there because I'm not a great person. I wasn't going to study, but I pretended like I was. And so, I took my bike and we walked to the library, and that was the kind of first time we had a conversation.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat. All right. So what was Christina studying at Northwestern?
Classics. Yeah, she was studying ancient Greek and Latin. I think she knew she went on to become a lawyer. I think she knew she wanted to go to law school at the time, but that's what she was doing as an undergraduate.
That's neat. What did you end up studying as an undergrad?
So I ended up studying English with a focus on creative writing. So I did a program, a really wonderful creative writing program at Northwestern. We're sort of almost like a MFA program, but for undergraduates, a Master of Fine Arts in Writing. And it was an intensive sequence in poetry. I did poetry first, and then studied abroad for a year, and then was accepted back to do the fiction writing program. So I did both poetry and fiction.
Oh, that's neat. Do you ever write poetry or fiction now, or is it just sort of the writing skills and the creativity that you carry with you?
Yeah. Not now. I mean, it's been years since I've been able to do that. I was very serious about it when I was in college and afterwards. I mean, I in fact, my very first poem was published in Poetry Magazine, which right when I graduated college, which was sort of the premier poetry literary journal in the country. It was actually a poem about visiting a monastic cave and seeing the ossuary where the bones are kept and the skulls. It's called In the Cave of Skulls. So there's a theme there. But so I wrote for, I did that for a while. Then I went on to graduate school and became more interested in becoming kind of a scholar. I was more interested in drama, theater. And, when I did my PhD, I focused on Shakespeare. So I did the writing bit of it sort of faded away. But the love of language, and that's served me, my entire life. I mean, as somebody who has to kind of live in language and speak publicly and write frequently, having that, that kind of intense, immersion in what it means to use language was invaluable.
Oh, that's fantastic. See, guys, anyone out there whose kids are talking about majoring in the humanities, it's okay. It's going to be fine. It's actually really important and useful and really helpful and good. But I always like to point that out because I just feel like so many people are so focused on STEM right now. And it's like, we're going to need both, right? We're still going to need everybody. We're still going to need these really creative and beautiful people who understand language. But
I think we need the humanities even more than ever. I mean, now that now with the kind of rise of AI and machines being able to do more autonomously, we need to balance that out with what it means to be human. I mean, and so I think the humanities are where we kind of live in our humanity as fully as possible. And I think we're living in an era where we have to do that with great intentionality.
I agree. Absolutely. Well, and I think we are, a little bit at risk in the sense that so many people are sort of pushing everybody away from the humanities. And it's like, well, at this particular junction, when we're already kind of losing what it means to be human, and we're losing our faith, and we're losing all of these things, God forbid that we not keep that going. But I'm sure we will. I'm sure it'll be all right. But all right, we are going to take a very quick break, and then we'll be right back. I want to remind you, if you have any questions, you're welcome to call 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. We'll be right back with Dr. Pano Kanelos.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
A great light has shone for the nations. A divine ray has risen for the darkened. Christ, the Son of Glory, has dawned for those who sat of old in the darkness of death.
Behold a Great Light is a daily devotional designed to help readers contemplate the mysteries of the Incarnation, from the beginning of the Nativity Fast on November 15th through Christmas and Theophany, ending with the Synaxis of St. John the Baptist on January 7th.
Every moment God gives us is an opportunity for repentance and healing. We are able to break character. Who we were in the past does not need to be who we are today or who we will be tomorrow. As long as we live, it is never too late for any of us to begin again by laying aside old sins and being purified and given new life from our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ.
Behold a Great Light, available now at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We are here with Dr. Pano Kanelos. And, we were actually we just sort of started talking a little bit about the importance of studying the humanities. And we had just gotten to the point where Pano got his PhD. So, Pano, did you become a professor for a while, or did you go straight into administration, or what did you do? I guess your career probably started before you finished the PhD, right? But how did it all work out?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely an accidental administrator. That was not my goal in life. And beware of people whose goal in life is to be an academic administrator. I finished up my PhD in 2002 at the University of Chicago. And then I had a postdoc fellowship, a teaching fellowship at Stanford. So we moved from Chicago to the Bay Area, and I was at Stanford teaching in what was called the Introduction to Humanities program at the time. And then went on to be a professor at University of San Diego and then Loyola in Chicago. And then 2013, I had an opportunity to become a dean at Valparaiso University in a kind of great books honors college there, Christ College. And that seemed, it really accorded, I've always been somebody who has been very attracted to what you might call great books education, the kind of, broad scope of philosophy and literature and, the history and the arts as kind of embedded in the tradition of the great books. And so Valparaiso has this wonderful honors college, Christ College, that has a kind of the curriculum centers on the study of the great books, at least early on. And so I had a chance to take over there as dean, and that was exciting. So went on there, was dean for 4 years, and then mysteriously, miraculously, I don't know what it was, I was offered the presidency at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which is, the kind of Platonic ideal of the Great Books College. It's been, it's a school dedicated to 4 years of reading the great books. There are no majors. You just sort of read with your classmates from the ancient world to the modern world, great works of mostly the Western tradition. It's just an amazing school. So I had the great blessing of being president there for 4 years. So, but again, it was an accidental administrator. I never really thought about taking on those roles. Just at each juncture, there was something really exciting and appealing.
That's neat. Well, and I love the whole idea of a Great Books program, because we have all these artificial separations, right? And it's like, well, actually, literature and philosophy and art, these things all feed off of each other, and they all have like the same movements, right? Like modernism happens across the board there, and all these things happen in that way. The Renaissance didn't happen in just one of those places, right? How amazing to be doing that. How many Great Books programs are there in the U.S. though? There aren't a whole lot, right? I know Notre Dame has one, Valparaiso, St. John's. Are there like maybe 10? Do you know?
That's a good question. I mean, there could be. I would say several dozen. I mean, there are a few other schools that are dedicated exclusively or extensively to Great Books. So there's Thomas Aquinas College in California. That's a sort of Catholic, very sort of faithful Catholic institution that's sort of modeled on the St. John's curriculum. There's even a place, I got to know the fellow who runs it, that's an Islamic Great Books College in Berkeley, California, called Zaytuna College. That's run by a fellow named Sheikh Hamza, that also took the St. John's model purposefully, but sort of imagined it in the Islamic context. Cool. So I think I would say there are dozens of schools that have Great Books programs. Oftentimes they're like an honors program or a first year program. That's what we had at Loyola as well. And I think with the kind of rise of classical education at the K through 12 level, we're going to see a kind of multiplication of these programs at the collegiate level as well.
That makes sense. That those people who've been raised in that system are going to want to continue. That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's neat. So when you were at St. John's, I have read that you had this huge historic tuition reduction program. How did you do that? How did you pull that off? How does anyone do that? Yeah. Can other people start doing that? Please, like at my kids' schools immediately.
Yeah. Well, so when I came in as president, like many schools, in fact, I would say the vast majority of colleges and universities in this country right now are financially unstable. People don't realize this from the outside, but unless you're sitting on billions of dollars of endowment, you're a tuition-driven school, and it's impossible for the tuition revenue that schools draw in to keep up with the expenses of the rising expenses of running universities and colleges. So there's just the financial model is really troubled. So when I got to St. John's, like many other schools, St. John's was financially wobbly and trying to figure out a way to right the ship. And and the tuition at the time was about $52,000 a year, just tuition without room and board. Private school, wow. Private liberal arts college, yeah.
Yeah, that's high though.
And so I and some of the other administrators sort of put our thinking caps on, and we sort of said, look, maybe the problem here, this may seem counterintuitive, but maybe the financial problems that schools are having are rooted in the fact that tuition keeps rising. And if we were able to lower tuition, we would make the school more affordable for more families, and it might solve the problem. Like, what do I know? I'm just a kid from a Greek diner. But so we spent a lot of time working on that question, worked with the board of trustees and others. We decided to lower tuition by 33%, by a third, from 52 to 35, which 35,000 is still a lot of money, but it's not 52. And the result was that the school was much better off financially after a few years. It had a balanced budget after a few years, and record enrollment and that. So, I do think that.
Well, I'm confused though. Is that volume? Is it like we had more students because we had a lower tuition? Like, why would you have more money by asking for less money?
It's very complicated. I'll try to give a shorthand version of this. So at the board meeting, the first board meeting where we discussed this, and the board was resistant at first, the idea of lowering tuition. Like, we're trying to make more money. Yep. And I said, well, our tuition is $52,000 a year. I asked the board chair, and I said, how many students actually pay $52,000 a year? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, that's the problem. So we called up the financial aid office right there and found out that out of the 850 students that were that were going to St. John's at the time, exactly 6 were paying $52,000 a year. And so what happens
do you
in
not
college?
Want to be those 6? Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
exactly.
Oh wow.
So what's happening in colleges and universities is this like really almost Byzantine kind of pricing structure where, pretty much every student is getting some kind of discount, and they might call it a merit scholarship or some other form of financial aid, but it's just a pricing matrix, the way that airline seats are sold, like to different prices to different people. And because it's so confusing, it dissuades a lot of families from even applying to what seem to be expensive schools, because they don't realize that the pricing is not what the list price is. I'm like, look, when you go to universities, you're going to be paying Nordstrom rack prices, not Nordstrom prices. And most people don't realize that. So by lowering the tuition and bringing it closer to what most people paid, more people applied. There was more transparency, and that gave the school a lot more financial, latitude. But college pricing is a very complex thing. I will tell most families, don't be put off by high price tuitions, because, apply to schools and see what kind of financial aid package they give you, because most schools understand that they have to meet families most of the way to where they are.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've had a couple of kids go to private schools, private colleges, graduate schools, even Ivy League schools, and we've never paid full price. I don't think anybody really does. So that makes sense. That really does.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So go on. So how did it go at St. John's? You did this, and it was just, you guys talked the board into it, and they gave it a try, and it worked.
It was fantastic. I mean, we had remarkable coverage nationally, because we were the first sort of national school to make a significant move like this. 4 years later, when I left the school, as I said, we were, I think, the only college in Maryland that had a budget surplus during COVID. That was the year that I left, and, great enrollment. And it's just, I think it's a question about clarity, transparency, honesty, and pricing, as opposed to the kind of, this kind of fog of war that you feel when you're sort of entering these financial arrangements with schools. And so, I think in the future, as we move forward, schools are going to have to give up the kind of prestige pricing that they have and be more open and honest with families.
I love that. It almost feels like you're walking in with, although you're an academic, obviously you have all the degrees and you were teaching and all this, but it's almost like you're just sort of walking in with a simpler perspective and just saying, like, listen, this is a price. These are pricing strategies. This isn't like magical tuition, isn't some, but it's true. I mean, I have 2 kids actively in school right now, and I actually don't know how much we're expected to pay each year, because it changes all the time. And it's like, oh, we just found you a grant. And you're like, what? Okay, great. But it's
right.
It's
so confusing, and it's not fair to families. I mean, I think transparency would be much better. And, it's not fair to universities, to be honest with you, because the schools, like I said, most are struggling financially, and they don't know what other schools are charging either, because everything's behind a veil. So that means that in order to bring students in, you're competing against other universities that they've applied to without having any idea of what the common price point should be. So it's a hot mess. So, someday when they put me in charge of everything having to do with all of higher education, I'll fix it.
Right.
But until then,
if only there were even such a position, right? Like,
if there was, I shouldn't be the person in charge if there is such a position. But
I never thought of the idea that the colleges themselves don't know what kind of packages the other schools are handing out. I mean, that makes perfect sense, but you are literally competing for these students, and everybody's offering them a package, and you have no idea. That's crazy.
It's like, imagine if there was a town that had only 4 gas stations, and they were all on, the same intersection, but none of them were allowed to display the actual price of the gas they were selling, and people could just drive from station to station. Like, what does that do to pricing? It means that eventually you're going to price your product below what you actually pay for it as an institution, because it's better to have some customer than no customer.
That's wild. That's amazing, actually. How fascinating. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's really cool. So things are going so well at St. John's. What took you away from St. John's?
Yeah, I mean, even though I love St. John's and I've had a great career across higher education, the institutions I've been part of have been wonderful. But, I was at increasing anxiety about the direction that higher education's been going in. I'd say for the most of my career, it just feels like universities, the financial model's broken, the curricular model doesn't seem to be quite what it should be. We're finding universities becoming extremely intensely politicized places. And, it feels like there's a kind of clearer, pure version of higher education that maybe we used to have. Maybe I'm romanticizing it, but that should be available to students and should be available for faculty to participate in. So it's part of a group of people who are thinking a lot about the direction higher education is going in and some of the challenges and what we could do to meet those challenges, and whether or not the challenges could be met from within higher education, whether we can renew things from the inside out, or if we had to create new institutions. And I was sort of struck one day in a conversation I was having with Barry Weiss, the journalist. She was challenging me, and she said, it's been so long since America has produced new universities, and yet America, lives and breathes by its spirit of innovation and its ability to create new models and for things and new institutions. There seemed to be something wrong that we haven't built new universities and haven't really reframed the university in so long that it would be salutary, it would be healthy if we can create a new institution, even if it was sort of committed to, let's say, more of the kind of foundational values of higher education. If we can create a new institution, it might set the course for other institutions to follow. And so after several conversations, meetings with other people, there were a group of founders, we decided to start a new university in Austin, Texas. And since I was the only one to have experience running an institution of higher education, I drew the short stick and had to move to Austin and start it myself, but with the support of the other founders.
That's amazing. I remember when you were first coming to town, we were all like, "Oh, University of Austin, what's that?" And I was looking at the website and I was like, incredulous. Like, can this be real? Are they really going to do this? Is it really going to work? Wouldn't that be amazing if it did? Tell us a little bit more about, like, what is the philosophy of this new school? And maybe also, like, how does one start a school? How did you, like, what? I can't even imagine, right? Like, I assume you have to get funds, right? You have to get backers. You need to have, like, a pile of money. You have to find, like, a campus, right? Like, what does the process look like? And what is sort of I kind of, explain to the audience what the philosophy at University of Austin is.
Sure. So the foundational principles that the school is built upon are that, universities are places for the discovery of knowledge, the transmission of knowledge, and the preservation of knowledge. That's why we have these institutions called universities. They're sort of where society does its thinking. And the conditions that are necessary to meet those ends are conditions of open inquiry, freedom of conscience, and civil discourse. So you have to have the open and free exchange of ideas if ideas are going to come together in productive ways and we're going to discover new things about ourselves and the world. You have to allow people freedom of conscience. That is, we're coming together in a kind of pluralistic way from different backgrounds with different belief systems. You should never compel people to give up what's in their heart and in their conscience to participate in a community like this. And then civil discourse, that we have to be able to discuss things, even very difficult and vexing things, in ways that foreground trust and community, so that we can seek truth together as opposed to seek some sort of verbal victory over one another. So So we announced in fall 2021, we were building a new university dedicated to the fearless pursuit of truth. And it was, many people celebrated it. Some people criticized it. So like, truth, like, what's that? That, like, truth, that's so 20th century. Like, no, we don't do truth anymore. That's crazy. So from certain quarters, there was some skepticism about the project. But so it was 2 years ago that we announced it. And when I say announced it, I mean, we really were just getting started. I mean, we had, it's myself and 3-4 other guys meeting in a coffee shop, sketching out how to build a university. And yet I'm very happy to say that 2 years later, as of October 26th, we've received authorization from the state of Texas, a charter to be the first new university in the state of Texas since 1963.
Wow.
So we are now a 4-year degree granting institution. We've raised over $200 million. We have a campus in Austin. We've just begun recruiting our first class of freshmen. And the applications are coming in from all over the country and all over the world. We've been hiring faculty. So, we've gone from an idea on the back of a napkin to being America's newest university in 2 years. And it's very exciting.
That's amazing. So there were no new schools in Texas for 60 years. That's crazy.
No new private universities. I think there were like some state branch campuses might have opened in that, but
yeah, that's
we were the first. In fact, when we went through the application process, there's a body called the Texas Higher Education Commissioning Board that oversees higher education in the state. And we're like, okay, we want to apply to be a university, and they're like, oh wait, like nobody knew what to do with that. Right. They like dust off some old tomes of old university building. And figure out like, what is the process? And I mean, it's a huge process. I mean, you have to essentially show the state that you have all the elements for a university to be prepared to be up and running. Financial model, your curriculum, your housing and campus plan, your health and safety. I mean, everything. It was we put about 1,800 pages together for our application, and took about a year long to process that. So by the time we got up and running this fall, I mean, really just a few weeks ago, we have what is essentially a functioning university already operating.
That's amazing. That's congratulations. That's so impressive.
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what, because I want to ask this, because I remember the first time I saw your website when you guys first announced, I was looking at it and I was like, is this code for just a really conservative university? You know what I mean? Because it was like, the forbidden courses and the searching for truth. And it's like sometimes, when we are so polarized, sometimes that is how conservatives talk. But then I'm looking at your faculty and I'm looking at the people involved and I'm thinking, no, it looks like people come in from all places, right? So it really isn't actually just code for like a super conservative, another polarized place, right? But just polarized that way.
Lisa, if I wanted to build a conservative university, it'd just be much easier to do that and say that. It would be like, in fact, I'd probably raise more money and faster because, there's a hunger for that in certain circles. But that's not the problem we were trying to solve. I mean, if the problem is that there is too much political asymmetry in higher education, that everything is now leaning towards one end of the political spectrum, the solution isn't to build something on the other end. It's to find ways to transcend that spectrum. I often say that, politics should be studied at a university. It shouldn't be the operating system of the university. And so, our goal really was to create an institution that transcended politics and, bridged people across all sorts of different divides, political and otherwise, including the divide between people who believe in the transcendent and those who don't. I mean, we're maybe one of the few secular institutions in the entire world that still believes in the possibility of transcendence and puts that really at the heart of what we're doing, to kind of quarantine religiosity and faith which is what most secular schools do. Like, if they have any studies at all in those regards, are sort of like, sort of embarrassed by it, and they kind of put it in a small closet somewhere. That's to miss, I think, what has been central to the human experience throughout all of human history. So how can you be a truth-seeking institution and not be committed to thinking about religiosity and faith and sacred text and that? And So, even though we are resolutely secular and that we don't have any particular faith commitments, we're thrilled to be a place that it will be a home for, in a very pluralistic way, for people of all different faith communities.
I love that. It's really exciting what you guys are doing. I mean, I'm someone who dropped out of a PhD program at Berkeley because I just wasn't Marxist enough. I just couldn't do it. I just could not do it in the 90s. I just sort of gave up on it. But so I definitely know what you're talking about. And I think it's not just academia, right? It's our whole country. We're very polarized. We're led by politics instead of by looking for truth in a lot of ways. And so I just, it gives me hope that you guys are doing this and that it's happening.
Yeah. And I'll say, look, I think a lot of my perspective does come from being, a lifelong Orthodox Christian. I mean, when you're Orthodox, you have a sense of the full scope of history. Like, you live with history across centuries and across time, and you see the kind of steady, the kind of the steady presence of the church across every political regime in every region and every quarter. You're like, here we are obsessed at this time with like red versus blue, rewind like 4 or 5 centuries and people are like, what are you talking about? Your politics are so, embedded in your particular moment. They don't represent anything higher. They don't represent anything, let's say, profoundly human. They're just specific and local. Yet we get so obsessed with what's in the weeds right now. And I think universities in particular have a responsibility to help us see the bigger picture. Universities have to rise above that. I mean, I often say that, universities are about knowledge over time, over the centuries. Universities have a presence in society over the centuries. Knowledge in time is the job of journalists, right? Like, they live in a perpetual present. Journalists are like, what do we know now? What do we think now? Journalists can be wrong. That's fine. In fact, they usually are wrong because they're the focus that they have is so, of now. Universities should have knowledge over time. And then I say, sacred institutions, their business is to have knowledge outside of time. So we have to right size our ambitions.
I love that. And I think that's true. And I think, thank God you guys are working on it. Do you feel like, is University of Austin at this point kind of like the one university that's trying this? This isn't like a bigger movement. This is really just kind of you guys so far, but hopefully one of these days it'll become something that's influential and interesting to other schools.
At this moment in time, I think, we're pretty distinctive. Although there are so many people interested in creating new institutions. I mean, I just got an email yesterday from a group in Canada that wants us to come up and open a university there. I mean, I've been in touch with people all over the world who are, really trying to plant new schools. And I think part of our mission is to show that it can be done, that we can build new institutions in spite of the obstacles. And if we're successful and we can show the way for others, then I think we'll see a whole new constellation of new universities, some of which will follow us closely, some of which will vary wildly. But, having a kind of heterogeneous, galaxy of institutions of higher learning can only serve the students who are looking for higher education.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, and maybe you will end up opening schools in Canada and all over the place, but probably just right now, I would imagine, focused on just getting this one going. Is that a big enough job?
I have no energy left over. Sorry, Canada, not now. But happy to have a Zoom call. But that's all we got. That's all I have.
It's really funny. Now. It's like it's made sense to them to call you, but literally, like, you're the only person they shouldn't have called because you're just like up to your neck in already putting together a school. Give it a couple of years maybe, but no, that's really neat. Well, Pano, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's beautiful to get to hear about both your faith and your upbringing and just the really neat work that you're doing right now.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for being a new and good friend in our parish in Austin. Just great to get to know you, Elise.
It's been a delight having you here, so thank you for coming. And it's also the website, University of Austin TX.com?
It's U, letter U, Austin.org. Austin.org.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure our listeners know, because I'm sure there are a few of them
Sure.
who are ready to look for it. But all right. Thank you so much, Pano. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Come on back next week. And actually, next week's Thanksgiving. Come back the week after next, and we'll meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night, guys.